10 hours and 20 minutes. That's what I had left, standing in the gravel lot of the Hollis County Farmers Cooperative Elevator and Produce, watching a man in a canvas coat shake his head at 9 tons of potatoes like they'd personally insulted him. "Can't take these, son." He said it the way you'd tell a dog to get off the porch. Not mean, exactly, just final. I'd backed the truck up at 7:40 sharp, the way the note said I should, engine ticking in the cool September air, and he'd walked around the bed once, picked up a Kennebec the size of a fist, with 3 knuckly growths on it like it had grown around its own knees, and set it back down like it might be contagious. "Grade standards," he said. "Warehouse is full besides, even if I wanted to." I looked at the potato. It was ugly, sure. Wet August had done that. Too much rain in the ground, and they'd swelled crooked, some of them split at the eyes, skins rough as a gravel road. But I dug through 400 pounds of them the week before, cut a dozen open with my pocket knife right there in the field, and every one of them was sound clear through. White flesh, no rot, no hollow heart, just ugly. "They're good potatoes," I said. "I believe you." He didn't look like he believed me. "Come back when they look like potatoes." That was it. He was already turning back toward the scale house, where a girl about my age, Dolores Ainge's daughter, I think, though I only half knew her, sat behind the window pretending she hadn't heard any of it. I stood there a minute with the truck idling behind me, a 1958 International Harvester box truck I didn't own, borrowed off Ed Callahan 2 farms over, with a rented refrigeration unit humming under the bed and a return deadline of 6 o'clock that evening stitched into the rental slip like a fuse. 9.2 tons. Kennebecs. Every one of them dug, sorted, and loaded by hand over the last week. My hands, mostly, with my dog Rooster asleep in the shade at the end of every row like he thought supervising was work. I did the arithmetic standing right there in the lot, same as I'd done it 40 times already lying awake the night before. $1,140 owed to Hollis County State Bank, due Friday at 5 o'clock sharp, co-signed 8 months back by a woman who wasn't around anymore to co-sign anything else. No adult to stand behind me if I asked for more time. No crop sold. No cash. Just a truck full of ugly potatoes ticking colder by the hour, and a man walking away from me across the gravel like the conversation was already over. By Friday at 5 o'clock, I'd either have $1,140 or I wouldn't have a farm. I climbed back into the cab, and for a second I just sat there, hands on the wheel, watching the co-op manager's back disappear through the warehouse door, before I remembered something my grandmother used to say about doors that close in your face, that they were rarely the only door in the building. 6 hours. That's what I had when I put the truck in gear and pulled out of that lot, and I'm going to tell you exactly how I got down to 6 hours, because none of it happened by accident. 8 months back, January of that year, the ground frozen so hard the gravediggers had to run a torch over it before they could break it. My grandmother died in her sleep in the back bedroom of the farmhouse she'd lived in since 1919. Redmore Hill Farm came to me the way a lot of things come to a person. Not because I was ready, but because there was nobody else standing in line for it. 60 acres, a dairy herd down to 4 cows by then, and the potato ground she'd worked every September since before my father was born. I was 17 when she died, 18 by the time anybody official cared to ask, and the banknote she'd signed with me back in the spring, $1,140, borrowed against seed and fertilizer and a used cultivator, didn't care how old I was either. It just sat there in a drawer at Hollis County State Bank, due Friday, September the 15th, 5 o'clock, no extensions, no exceptions, and no adult left alive to put a second signature on anything. The potatoes should have been simple. Kennebecs, same variety she'd grown for 40 years, and by every measure that mattered, starch, size, keeping quality, they were fine. But August had come in wet, 3 inches over normal by the 5th week, and wet ground makes potatoes grow crooked, knuckled, split down one side like a fist that never quite closed. 9.2 tons of them, sound as $1 underneath the skin, and ugly enough on top that the co-op manager wouldn't put his stamp on a single sack. Which left me with a truck. A borrowed one, a 1958 International Harvester box truck with a refrigeration unit that hummed like it resented the job, lent to me by my neighbor on the promise I'd have it back in his yard by 6 that evening, or $15 a day, started stacking onto a bill I already couldn't pay. 6 o'clock for the truck, 5 o'clock Friday for the note. 2 clocks running at once, and only one of them mine to control. I sat in that cab a minute longer than I should have, watching condensation bead up on the inside of the windshield, and thought about how my grandmother used to keep things. Ledgers, receipts, little slips of paper tucked into places you wouldn't think to look. She'd never once, in all the years I helped her load a truck, driven straight to that co-op without stopping at the house first. I didn't know yet why that mattered, but I put the truck in gear anyway and drove home to find out. The gravel drive threw dust behind me the whole way home, and I didn't slow down for the culvert the way I usually did. The truck bounced hard enough to rattle the crates in back, and I heard a few potatoes thump against the wood, like knuckles knocking on a door nobody was going to answer. 9.2 tons doesn't sound like much until you're the only one lifting it, one crate at a time, into September heat that hadn't gotten the memo about fall. I backed the International up to the barn, dropped the tailgate, and started pulling crates just to have something to do with my hands, while my head worked the real problem. Sorting them didn't make sense. They were all the same kind of ugly, knobby, and cracked from all that August rain, but sorting them gave me 11 minutes where I wasn't thinking about a clock ticking toward 6, or another one ticking toward Friday at 5. By noon, my stomach quit letting me ignore it, so I went in for a sandwich, and that's when I saw the tin sitting on the counter where it always sat, green and dented at one corner, the paint gone thin over the words MT, Church Supper Box, in her handwriting on masking tape she'd stuck to the lid sometime before I was born. I'd looked in that tin 100 times growing up, pulled out her spice cake recipe, her piccalilli, the one for scalloped potatoes she made every Sunday in winter. I never had a reason to look past the cards themselves. But I was standing there with a knife in one hand and bread in the other, not thinking about lunch anymore, thinking about what she used to say, that you don't drive to town without knowing who's buying. And something made me lift the whole stack of cards out at once instead of thumbing through them. Underneath, flat against the tin bottom, was a piece of paper folded in quarters, gone soft and yellow at the creases, like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times, sometime long before I was old enough to remember. It didn't look like a recipe. The fold was too careful, too deliberate, the kind of fold you do when you mean to keep something, not use it up. I set the sandwich down without taking a bite. My hands were dusty from the crates, and I remember being careful about that, wiping them on my jeans before I touched the paper, like it mattered, like the dirt might matter more to it than to me. The truck was still running behind me. Somewhere out past the kitchen window, that refrigeration unit kept humming its tired complaint, burning daylight I didn't have. But I stood there anyway, thumb and forefinger on the edge of that fold, feeling the same thing I used to feel as a kid, pulling open a drawer in the barn I wasn't supposed to touch, that a door was about to open that I hadn't known was there. I unfolded it slow, the way you'd open something that might tear if you rushed it. Before I could get past the first crease, tires crunched gravel out front, fast, too fast for anybody delivering feed or asking to borrow a wrench. I folded the paper back along its own lines without meaning to, some instinct closing my hand around it before my head caught up, and I was out the screen door before whoever it was had the truck in park. It was her, the girl who ran the scale at the co-op, 17, her father's old Ford pickup skidding a little in the loose gravel by the porch. She didn't cut the engine. She leaned across the bench seat and hollered through the open window like she'd been holding the words the whole 4 miles out from town. "He's going to call you before noon." "Who?" "The manager, Vance." She said his name like it tasted bad. "I heard him on the phone with somebody from the feed mill in Danville. He's going to offer to take your whole load off your hands, all 9 tons. Says he'll do it as a favor, since you're—" She made a face, quoting him without wanting to, "since you're in a spot." "For what price?" "Scrap feed price," she said it flat, no dressing on it. $4 a hundredweight. Maybe $4.50 if you push him. I did the arithmetic without trying to. 9.2 tons, scrap price. Wouldn't clear $800 even if he was generous. I owed $1,140 by 5 o'clock Friday. It would leave me short by more than $300, and it would leave me with nothing. No crop, no leverage, no next spring. Just a name in the co-op's books as the boy who took the mercy price and went home grateful. "He's not doing you a favor," she said, like she could hear the arithmetic too. "He's doing himself one. Feed mill pays him a spotter's fee for finding cheap tonnage. He gets a check either way. You get whatever's left." I looked at the folded paper still in my fist, forgotten there, and then at the truck idling behind me, and then at her, sitting in her father's Ford with her elbow out the window like she had all day, when I knew for a fact she was supposed to be back at that scale by 8:30, or her own father would hear about it. "Why are you telling me this?" She shrugged, but it wasn't a careless shrug. "Because somebody ought to be on your side of the ledger for once." Then, quieter, like she hadn't meant to say the second half out loud. "And because he called you son, twice this morning, like you were a stray dog, somebody dropped off. I don't like watching that." The clock over the stove behind me, I knew without looking, was already past 9. Whatever was folded in that paper in my hand was going to have to wait exactly as long as it took me to decide I wasn't taking $4 a hundredweight from a man who thought a favor and a fee could wear the same coat. I told her no, not loud, not the kind of no that needed an audience. Just the word, flat, the way you'd tell a dog to sit when it already knows the command and is only testing whether you mean it today. She didn't argue. She just nodded once, like she'd expected exactly that answer and had been waiting to see if I'd earn it, and then she put the Ford in reverse and rolled back onto the county road toward the scale house, toward whatever her father would say about the 11 minutes she'd spent parked next to a boy and a truck full of potatoes nobody wanted. I stood there a second longer than I should have, doing the arithmetic anyway, because a person can refuse a number and still let it sit in his chest like a stone. $4 a hundredweight on 9.2 tons came to something close to $736, and my note at the bank was $1,140, due Friday at 5 o'clock whether the sky fell or not. $736 against $1,140 left a hole I couldn't farm my way out of, not with the dairy check 3 weeks off and the hay not baled yet. Taking the scrap price would have meant walking into the bank Friday and being short meant the loan officer's polite, firm voice, explaining once more that there was no extension for a minor without an adult cosigner in the room, and there was no adult cosigner anymore, and hadn't been since January. But that wasn't really the arithmetic that decided it. What decided it was smaller than that, and stupider, maybe, to anyone who hadn't grown up eating supper across the table from a woman who wrote every sale in a ledger in pencil so it could never be argued with in ink. She never sold under cost. Not during the drought year, not during the winter the well went dry and the Hendricksons offered to take the whole flock off her hands for half what they were worth. She used to say a fair price wasn't a favor you asked for, it was a fact you stood on, and if a man wanted you to move off it, that told you more about him than about the potatoes. I climbed back into the cab of the International Harvester, the seat still warm, the load ticking heat against the refrigeration unit that was already costing me by the hour, whether I moved it or not. I looked at the dash clock, 9:11, 6 hours and 49 minutes until that truck had to be back in Otto Kruger's yard, and I had spent 11 of them proving a point to a man who wasn't even standing in front of me anymore. I put the truck in gear anyway, because standing still cost the same as driving badly, and pointed it toward the one place I hadn't let myself think about since Sunday night, the green tin on the kitchen shelf, and the folded paper inside it I hadn't unfolded yet. The drive back to the farm took 14 minutes and felt longer, because I kept doing the arithmetic in my head the way I used to do multiplication tables under Mrs. Alderman's ruler. 6 hours and 30-some minutes now, minus 14 for the drive, minus whatever it took to check the cows and make sure Delilah hadn't gotten into the feed room again, and the number kept shrinking no matter how I turned it. I parked the International Harvester in the yard with the refrigeration unit still humming, still burning diesel I couldn't spare, and went into the kitchen at a near run. The tin was where it had always been, on the shelf above the stove, between a jar of bacon grease and a chipped sugar bowl, green paint worn to bare metal at the corners where her thumbs had opened it 1,000 times. MT, church supper box, stenciled in a hand not hers, older. My great-grandmother's, maybe. I lifted the lid and there it was, folded in quarters and gone soft as cloth, tucked behind the recipe cards for pickled beets and vinegar pie. I meant to open it right there. I didn't. Delilah bawled from the barn like the world was ending, and there were still 6 cows standing in the yard with milk coming whether the co-op wanted my potatoes or not, and so the paper went into my shirt pocket and stayed there through 2 hours of chores I did faster and worse than usual, glancing at the clock nailed above the stanchions every time I straightened up. It wasn't until after supper, a supper I don't remember eating, that I sat down at the kitchen table under the hanging lamp and unfolded it properly, the way you'd unfold something you were afraid might tear. Her handwriting, cramped and slanted, dated in the corner, 1943. A list. Not names I recognized from church or the Grange Hall, but names all the same. Hollis County School District, supped and off, written first, and beside it, in pencil gone gray, 400 pounds, .02/obede, paid cash, November starty, and below that, Bellwood Canning Co., Writ 9, 2 counties, 3 tons starch grade, .015/obede, check in 10 days. Underneath those, 4 more entries I'd never heard of, a cannery in a town I couldn't place, a boarding school, a rail depot buyer, each with a number beside it, a price, a note about how they paid. At the bottom, in ink darker than the rest, like she'd come back to it later, seconds are not garbage, they are supper for somebody. Sell them as what they are. I sat there with the list in front of me for longer than I want to admit, and then I got up and found the ledger, the real one, the green cloth-bound account book she'd kept under the flour bin, the one I'd already gone through twice looking for feed receipts, and found nothing but columns of numbers that meant little to me at the time. I hadn't read the words between the numbers. Now I did. October 1943. 3 lines, cramped at the bottom of a page otherwise full of egg money and cream checks. Co-op refused 6 CWT. Potatoes, grade B. Said warehouse full. Said try again spring. Can't wait till spring. Called school super. Called cannery man Route 9. Sold direct, cash plus check, $19.40 total. Below it, underlined twice, never again through them if I can help it. I read it 3 times. Then I sat back in the chair, and the lamp above the table hissed the way it always did when the wick needed trimming, and I thought about her standing in that same warehouse doorway 18 years before I was born. Some co-op man in a canvas coat telling her the same thing a different man in a different coat had told me that morning. Grade standards, full warehouse, try again, and her not arguing, not crying, just turning around and driving to a school superintendent's office with a load of potatoes nobody else wanted. There was a war on then. Rationing boards, sugar stamps, meat you couldn't get without a coupon book, and somewhere in the middle of all that a widow, because by then her husband had already been 3 years gone, though I never knew until that night, had figured out that a cafeteria feeding 400 farm kids didn't care if a potato had 2 eyes and a shoulder like a fist, it just needed a potato, and a canning company boiling down starch didn't care about a potato's face at all. She never told anybody this, not at church suppers, not at the Grange Hall, not to me, in 18 years of Sunday dinners and canning jar afternoons. She'd just done it, quietly, the way she did most things, and then folded the paper into a tin and let it sit in a drawer for 18 years until a Tuesday morning when her grandson stood in the same parking lot getting told the same thing. I looked at the clock on the wall, 9:15. The truck was still sitting out by the barn with 9 tons of potatoes going soft in the September night if I let it, and somewhere 2 counties over there was a cannery on Route 9 that might still exist, might still be run by somebody's son, the way I was somebody's grandson, and a school district office that opened at 8 in the morning, whether or not it remembered the name Redmore. I didn't sleep so much as lie there running numbers. 9.2 tons, $15 a day if the truck sat past 6 on Tuesday, which it already had, because I hadn't moved it, because at 6 o'clock Tuesday I was still standing in a co-op parking lot with a clipboard man telling me about grade standards. That was one debt stacking onto the other now, a second clock ticking next to the first, and I'd have to eat that $15 somehow before Friday, no matter what else happened. Wednesday morning I was up, before the rooster bothered, and by 7 I was at the end of the county road where she was waiting with her bicycle laid down in the ditch grass, arms crossed, like she'd been standing there an hour deciding whether I'd actually show. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said. Didn't. She climbed up into the cab without waiting to be asked, and I didn't argue, because 2 people finding an office faster than 1 person finding an office is just arithmetic. The Hollis County School District Supply Office sat behind the high school low brick building, flag out front snapping in a wind that smelled like rain coming from the west. Inside, a woman at a metal desk looked up at us over reading glasses like we'd tracked something onto her floor. "We already have our produce contracts set for the fall term," she said, before I'd said a full sentence. "I've got 9 tons of Kennebec sitting 2 miles from here," I said. "Sound all the way through. Cosmetic seconds only. Do you have an invoice book? A supplier number?" I didn't. I had a tin box with a folded paper in my coat pocket and a name, her name, my grandmother's name, that this woman had never heard and had no reason to trust coming out of an 18-year-old mouth. "I've got a truck outside," I said. "You want to look at a potato before you look at a paper." She didn't move for a second. Then the neighbor's daughter leaned forward and said her father bought seed from us every spring, said it like a reference, like collateral, and something in the woman's face shifted half an inch. Not belief exactly, just enough doubt about her own doubt to make her push back her chair. We walked her out to the truck bed in that gray morning light, and I pulled back the tarp, and there they sat, 9 tons of knuckled, lopsided, perfectly good potatoes, looking exactly as ugly as they'd looked the day the co-op turned them away. She picked up one, turned it over twice, set it back down like she was giving it a chance to argue for itself. I already had my knife out, the same folding knife I used to notch ear tags on the calves, and I split one open right there on the tailgate, top to bottom, and held the 2 halves apart so she could see the flesh, white and solid, no dark rot ring, no scab pitting, nothing but good starch clean through. 0.09% Coles, I said, which wasn't a number I'd made up on the spot. It was a number my grandmother had written in the margin of a 1943 ledger page, next to a school district's name, and I'd read it so many times the night before that it came out of my mouth like something I actually knew instead of something I'd borrowed. The agent looked at the potato, then at me, then at her watch, which told me she was already thinking past the argument and into the arithmetic. "District pays 11 cents a pound on seconds," I said. "That's what you paid in 58. What you paid in 54. I checked. I hadn't checked with her. I'd checked with a dead woman's handwriting, but she didn't know that, and the number landed close enough to real that she didn't flinch at it, just did the math out loud, slow, like she was testing whether I'd flinch first. 3,500 pounds. $385. Cash. Today. If I could have it to the loading dock by 10:30, Because the kitchen staff started prep at 11 and she wasn't running a truck twice. I said yes before I'd worked out whether the truck had the diesel to make 2 more stops after this one. The gauge had been sitting under a quarter tank since the co-op lot, and Bellwood was still 14 miles past this, and the rental clock on the International was ticking towards 6 o'clock whether I'd eaten breakfast or not. The neighbor's daughter caught my eye over the tailgate. She'd done the same math half a second behind me. I could tell by the way her mouth flattened, and neither of us said it out loud in front of the agent, because saying it out loud would have sounded like doubt, and I couldn't afford to look like I doubted anything, not for 1 more minute. 10:30, I said again, like repeating it made it truer. She was already walking back toward the building, calling over her shoulder for someone named Ruth to bring out the produce scale and 2 men from the kitchen crew, and I climbed back into the cab with $385 not yet in my pocket and a fuel gauge I was suddenly praying to. The fuel gauge held 14 miles of state highway, then 2 miles of gravel that rattled the truck bed hard enough I kept glancing in the mirror at the tarp, half expecting to see potatoes bouncing loose onto the road behind me. Bellwood Canning Company sat low and long behind a chain-link fence, steam rising off one corner of the roof even in the September heat, and a hand-lettered sign that said, "Receiving, no deliveries after 3 o'clock." It was 2:51. The foreman came out wiping his hands on a rag that had been white once. He didn't say son, he didn't say much of anything at first, just walked the length of the truck bed with his hands in his pockets, looking at the load the way a man looks at weather he isn't sure about yet. "Kennebecs," I said. 9, 5.7 tons of it, after the school took their share this morning. "Wet August. They're ugly. They're not bad." He picked one up, turned it over twice, pressed his thumb into a knob on the side of it like he was testing a bruise. "Starch don't care what it looks like," he said, mostly to himself. He walked to the scale house without another word, and I followed him because standing still felt worse than moving, and the neighbor's daughter stayed by the tailgate with her arms crossed, watching him the way she'd watched the co-op manager 3 days before, like she was cataloging him for later. The scale operator ran the truck up onto the platform. The needle climbed and settled, climbed again. The foreman read it off a clipboard, wrote something, read it a second time like he didn't trust the first number, though I couldn't tell if that was good or bad. 11,400, he said. Call it 5.7 ton. Nobody moved for a second. I noticed I had stopped chewing on the inside of my cheek, which meant I'd been doing it long enough to notice. $19 a ton, he said finally, not looking up from the clipboard. That's the secondade price. That's what we pay when it don't sort. He did the math on the clipboard, slow, like he wanted me to see every figure. 5.7 times 19. He wrote it, circled it, handed me the pink copy. $108.30. Add that to what the school district had already counted into my hand that morning. $362 cash, cafeteria manager licking her thumb twice through the stack. And I was somewhere past 400 before Bellwood ever weighed a potato. The rest came slower. A company check written out by a woman in the front office who typed my name wrong the first time and had to start over. Redmore with 1 O instead of 2, and I watched her correct it and thought about how many people had spelled that name right without ever knowing what it cost to keep it on a mailbox. By the time we pulled out of Bellwood's yard, the truck bed rattling empty behind us, the sky had gone that low gray color that means evening is coming, even though it's only 4 o'clock, and I had $1,186 folded into an envelope that used to hold seed catalogs, plus the church supper recipe tin riding on the seat between us like it had earned the trip. Friday came clear and a little cold, the kind of September morning where you can see your breath if you stand in the shade. I didn't wait until 5. I got to Hollis County State Bank at 20 past 4, envelope in my coat pocket, and asked for the loan officer by his title because I still didn't know if I was allowed to say his name out loud without an adult standing next to me. He came out from behind the counter, same as before, same gray suit, and I set the envelope down and started counting it out on the desk in front of him. the school district cash, the Bellwood check endorsed over, ones and fives and a stack of tens rubber-banded together that still smelled faintly of potato dirt. He didn't say anything while I counted. Neither did I. When I got to 1140, I stopped and looked up at him, and he looked back at me, and I set down the rest, $46 more than he'd asked for, without a word about interest or extensions or minors needing a grown man's signature. He wrote the receipt himself, paid in full, September 15, 1961. He slid it across the desk, and for just a second his mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile, more like a man recalculating a number he'd been sure of. "Tell your grandmother I said that was a fine crop," he said, and then caught himself, because we both knew there was nobody left to tell. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in early October, the co-op manager's Ford pulled into the yard at Redmore Hill while I was pulling the last of the fall onions. Same gray suit, dust on the cuffs from the road. He didn't get out right away, just sat there a minute like he was deciding something, and then he did, and he came across the yard with his hand already out to shake mine before I'd wiped the dirt off on my jeans. He said the co-op board had been asking about my Kennebecs, said word travels in a county this size that Bellwood's man had mentioned the size and the sugar content at a Grange supper, and that the school district cook had told somebody's wife it was the best potato salad she'd made all fall. He said he'd like to put me under contract for next year's crop, guaranteed price, no grading nonsense, paperwork done proper this time. I let him stand there a second before I answered, the way I'd stood in his lot on a Tuesday morning back in September, with 9 tons going soft in a rented truck. "Come back in spring," I said, "when the ground's turned and I know what I've got." He nodded slow, like a man who understood exactly what I was doing and didn't hold it against me, said he would. Got back in the Ford and drove off down the county road, and I went back to my onions. I still have the ledger. It sits in the kitchen drawer now, not the cellar, next to the green recipe tin, and some evenings I take it out and read her handwriting. The small, careful numbers of a woman who fed a county through years when nobody had money to waste on pretty vegetables. I've added my own pages to it since. Bellwood still buys my seconds every fall. The school district, too. I never went back to needing the co-op, though I sell them the good ones now, at their price, because there's no sense holding a grudge against a scale. There's a barn on this place I still haven't gone through all the way, a loft I've only half cleared. My grandmother kept 40 years of paper in drawers I hadn't opened until I needed them, and I think about that some nights. How much of what saves you is just sitting there, waiting for you to be desperate enough to look. If somebody's told you you're too young for the work in front of you, I'd guess you already know that isn't the whole truth. It's just the thing people say when they haven't seen you do it yet. That's the story. If it did something for you, stick around. There's more from Redmore Hill and places like it. And if you've got a drawer of your own, something an old ledger or a tin box handed you when you needed it most, I'd like to hear about it down in the comments.